I feel that a lot of people think sound design is basically just like picking a sound that exists, and putting it somewhere. Because aside from just making sure through editing and whatnot that the sound kind of fits the overall scene, especially in game audio, there is this whole other world of implementation, like not just doing a sound asset, but actually getting it into the game, manipulating it into the engine, and of course, mixing all of this together. Like in most modern games that are somewhat shooting heavy, you can bet that a single shot sound, like what you perceive as a single shot sound, actually consists of upwards of 50 sounds that are mixed in real time based on the environment you're in, the distance to the shot that you have, etc. There's the question of how wide a sound is. Like if you imagine someone is talking, you likely want to have it very spatialized so you can really pinpoint where this is coming from. But if you have like an explosion, imagine the real world, all the sound would reflect off from the ground. So it wouldn't sound as if it's just coming from this one location if it's close to you, but all these reflection would make it sound very wide, like it's kind of engulfs you.
Today, we're going to be unpacking what sound design really means in games, how it shapes the player experience, and why so much of what we hear isn't real, which is an interesting thought because it's like, how does that work, right? It's sound, it's got to be real. But anyway, I just quickly, do you want to just introduce how you got yourself in games and just sound design in general? Because you started off as a musician.
Yeah. So do you want like the very, very short form? Because it is a bit of a story.
Nah, tell the story. Tell the story.
I'm going to do the short form. If you have any more questions, just ask.
Okay.
Yeah. So long story short, I'm not a trained musician or sound designer. Like I never went through any like formal training in any way, shape or form. I actually first became a musician thanks to my father basically being like, hey, this kid is just in his room doing nothing, playing games, so maybe he can do something productive. And he got me a little music app back then. Back then it was not called app. I think it was 2008 or 2009 called Rebirth, which is basically just some sort of sampler where you can do like a little bit, but it wasn't like a proper music production suite. And it didn't really click at first. Later it did around 2009-ish, which led to me actually first making music. And then I really got into playing the Arma series. And eventually in 2013, I started doing sound design for Arma because I realized, hey, I have through the music, I have like the software for it and I can exchange sounds and play around with it. And I basically just did sound modding for years and years on end, man. And the first properly commercial project, which back then was kind of semi-commercial, it was actually a community DLC for Arma 3, meaning like a DLC that is done by community members that kind of loosely form a development group that started in 2017, which is also almost 10 years ago. Jesus.
Time flies.
So yeah, and one thing led to another. My actual professional background, quote unquote, was more in like business consulting / headhunting. And I didn't really like that too much. Like it was going well, especially in the beginning, but I realized that this quote unquote high business world is just not for me. And I was also not very keen on doing like cold calling, sales, etc. And more things led to another, and I decided to become a freelancer, which luckily worked out a lot better than I initially expected. And through a back then friend who kept in touch with Bohemia Interactive, like him and I, mostly him though, he was always very much in touch with Bohemia Interactive, and he basically then got us to Bohemia in early 2021. So it's really not like the classical journey of doing some education, getting in there. It was really more like modding. People got to know me a little bit, and I really liked the studio. And back then it was like with Bohemia, like, hey, if you want to work, like you could work for us, but you would need to move to Czechia. And we're like, nah, we'd kind of like to stay in Germany. And then COVID hit. And things changed and people started working remotely. And that was when the back then project lead on Arma Reforger, who was the previous head of multimedia / audio who we actually already met and did some like a little recording session with, went like, hey, I know these two guys, they want to work here, maybe it works now. And as I said, Andre, like my back then buddy, kept in touch, and I was kind of not believing in it. He believed in it and he pushed for it, and we ended up at Bohemia, and that's the story.
I love how you mentioned that you didn't have a traditional kind of rise into games, because A, that's something I've noticed of a lot of different people that I've spoken to, and B, a lot of people who are in the games industry, just to play devil's advocate, have started in modding. Like, that's how a lot of people break in, and I think that's going to come back now in terms of the way things are heading and how you can kind of break into games now, especially come the community aspect of it. But I wanted to ask you, how would you explain Arma and modding? Like, what is Arma, and how are you modding that game, right?
So for those unaware, Arma is a authentic military sandbox, I would call it. I think at one point, even the game itself called itself like military sandbox, a military simulation. I'm not sure. Long story short, the goal of Arma has always been to be a bit more than like a typical shooter. So it simulates a lot. It is usually a lot slower paced. And the big thing is, which is also, I guess, the reason why I really got so much or so deep into it back then, it is extremely moddable. Like Bohemia had always been very modding friendly, meaning the games were always developed to be as modding friendly, as open as possible. So it is extremely easy to create all sorts of content. Well, it's not extremely easy, but it's approachable, accessible. There's proper documentation, etc. So people can get their own vehicles in, their own functionality, which I did back then, exchange sound assets and then developed some more audio functionality like real-time reflections and stuff like that from the environment, which led to Arma becoming kind of the birth ground for so many now well-known games like Battle Royale, like PUBG, actually the whole Battle Royale thing kind of originated from Arma 3 or a mod for Arma 3. Yeah.
I didn't know.
DayZ originated as a mod, started out as a mod for Arma 2, which then, was further developed, and eventually Dean Hall, the original mod creator, joined Bohemia to then create DayZ, the game as we know it today. So yeah, that's Arma. It is at the core, a realistic authentic military sandbox. And due to the sandbox nature and its modding friendliness, everything can be done. Like the largest servers for a while in Arma 3, maybe still, are live simulations where Arma has these huge maps up to like 300 square kilometers and above. And people would literally just do live simulations, like you might know it from like GTA Live or whatever. And I never played it myself, but those Arma live simulations are literally just people joining a server and they grow crops and do farming. Some people do police, and you can just do that in Arma. There's alien mods. People turned it into a jump and run RPG, and that's the beauty.
So is it a military focused modding platform? It feels like more generic, where people can kind of build what they want, but then it does take that focus into kind of the shooter. Like how do I understand? Because it sounds like a foundation of just all these modders working together, R&D, figuring stuff out, working together, and then you get these fun game modes. But when I went on the website, it seemed very military focused. So what is? How do you explain it?
I think that's also kind of the beauty, because at the core, of course, it is military focused. If you play Arma as the vanilla experience and the way it is marketed and what it's at the core meant to be, it is, of course, very military focused. It is a military sandbox. Bohemia works with, or at least in the past worked with, the Red Cross, for example, to bring more civilian aspects into it. How do civilians suffer, etc. But due to it being so moddable, I think it is really the case of, if it's possible, people will do it. And if we go back to the good old times of Operation Flashpoint, which was actually Bohemia's first proper game, they lost the licensing, the name rights to Codemasters, so then they had to rebrand to Arma, but back then it was Operation Flashpoint. This already was very moddable, and I think this is where like a core modding player base started, and it became well known that these sort of games are very moddable, and then people just went with it, because yes, as you said, it might be completely paradox, but it's just the way it is. It is a military platform, or like with a military focus, but people just do whatever the hell they want with it. And that, I think that's the greatness of Arma. There's really, if it's possible, people will do it.
I think in a lot of ways you're going to be seeing a lot more people using these sandbox environments like in the futures. People get more kind of technically adept to kind of working with games. I think even, I mean, I don't want to start talking about AI right now, but in general, people can learn things faster. They can get involved. There's a lot more creativity that's being empowered, I think, in the community and people creating their own games. I'm always very fascinated with modding platforms because at the end of the day, people want to play the games that they want to play, or they want to experiment with things that, rather than waiting for a publisher to do it, they'll jump in and in a community will build incredible experiences. And like you mentioned, DayZ, Battle Royales, like that's insane. Like I didn't know that it came from.
Oh yeah.
Incredible. So, So what's it like working with a bunch of modders in a sandbox environment? Like how would you describe that?
Do you mean like back then or
even now?
nowadays?
Yeah, in general, yeah. Like how is it? It could also be back then, but how would you explain it to someone that has no idea what it means to work with other modders in a community?
Let me think real quick. Well, I mean, for me personally, I kind of have both perspectives now, right? Because I started out as a modder for Arma. Now I'm a developer in Arma. But I think at the core, it kind of remained the same in terms of how modding works and how people cooperate in modding in a way that as long as there's a platform where people can find each other and try to realize something, they will do it. And I know it sounds super cheesy, but the way it was for Arma 3, for example, was there would be the Bohemia forums and people would maybe post some ideas. If someone was like, hey, I have this idea and I already started working on it. And then some other people came in like, oh yeah, we might be able to help you with this, And I personally worked, aside from some larger projects, mostly on my own doing sound mods. And then when joining these larger projects, it was also always just sound. And it was somewhat loosely organized. And I think the awesome part is that it still kind of worked. I mean, you and me both, we worked in professional development studios. And I think the biggest difference really is organization, I would say. And it's kind of astonishing how loose all of this is oftentimes handled, especially in larger modding teams where you would think like, oh, yeah, like there must be like some amazing structure and everything is like super planned through. It's often really not from my own experience, but it still works. It still works. And I think it's always a gamble in the matter of people just really wanting to do something and everybody is just in line, not because it's their job, but it's because they voluntarily said, hey, I really want to do that. And people often really want to do that, which is a risk, of course, that commercial studios probably can't really take at times, but which makes even large modding groups work. I mean, there is some project structure, like some ticket system sometimes or whatever, but in the end, it's really just guys being like, hey, you have this model finished. Can somebody kind of integrate into the game? Can someone do sounds? And it happens.
It's incredible. You remove the guardrails and you add a passion. I didn't want to cut you off, but you add a shared passion or a shared goal or mission. Remove the guardrails to organization so people can just work together quickly. And people build stuff really, really fast and at a really high level. I've seen this in kind of old school RuneScape with their whole plugin community and what they've been able to build. You see this with add-ons across games, any kind of shared community network of builders and players who want to contribute can do so much.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. Like genuine passion just cannot be replaced. And I think as cheesy as it might sound, or as obvious maybe in some sense, as you mentioned, like I think modding and having something to show or stuff like game jams will, or actually are, super important nowadays, because I don't want to go too far from your initial question, but since we're just here, obviously the gaming industry is what it is right now. And I feel that especially in audio, so many people are looking for jobs at the moment. And I feel there is this huge discrepancy between gaming in general, or game education or game development education, also in audio now, becoming more and more a thing, like it's more in the public consciousness, while jobs are actually decreasing again. So we have a lot more people going into the market, like finishing their education and like, okay, I'm ready. I have everything I need. And studios are like, yeah, but we actually don't need that many people right now. So it's extremely competitive. And I really do believe the people that actually are super passionate about it and just work, not as a professional work, but that just do stuff because they want to learn, experience, to have something to show or do it for their own fun, will be the ones coming out with a better chance to stick with the industry and land jobs. Simply because if you think, hey, it's my job and I just want to find a job, and there are so many other people that are so genuinely passionate about it, you're just at a disadvantage. Something I really love at Bohemia, for example, is that the company is always very active in looking out for modders. Like they are very aware that this sort of passion is a huge asset and super valuable, and oftentimes also contributes just to a great team feeling. Like Bohemia is always looking for like, hey, who's actually active? How do they communicate in the community, etc. And I think we have like, I don't want to lie, but at Bohemia, I think it's like 20 or 30% of the Arma development team, something like that, if I remember correctly, are former modders, which includes myself. And I think it shows in many aspects.
So is modding almost, I don't want to say better education, but it's really important for someone to know how to mod to become a great, like I'm trying to question between the traditional path, which is going to university and kind of getting the credentials, going to the classes, which is great. I'm not trying to step away from it, but it sounds like with modding, you get thrown into a semi-professional environment where you have to be kind of innovative and creative, and you have to work with people at a faster degree and a faster rate of just exposure than you would potentially going to school and doing projects and coming out of it.
Well, I think it's yes, and I would say it's, well, yes, but I would say it's not just modding, it's just doing things in general.
Okay.
Because I think there's a huge difference between, let's say, honing a craft. So let's say I'm looking for a job, and I was super lucky getting into the position I am right now. So I have almost no experience in the, gaming job market, especially nowadays, because I was lucky enough to be in job for quite a while now. So, but if I just imagine, if I just study for myself, try to improve my craft, make some reel to show what I could do, like a 1 or 2 minute video, that's one thing. But I think if I put myself into the shoes of someone who is hiring, I would rather see that this person actually has done something, has proven that in an actual development context, they achieved this, whether it is sound or in other areas. And working in a modding team or also a game jam, stuff like this, like working in a team also is a huge thing, which one has to learn. And like little thing from my side, for example, when I then joined Bohemia, like the first time that I was actually working in a proper professional team, with other audio guys, I personally definitely created friction because I came from modding and I did not have that teamwork experience. And I was constantly thinking, maybe it should be done a bit more like the way I wanted, and I really first had to proper learn to check my ego and realize, hey, I'm a service provider for the people above me, like we can discuss stuff, but in the end, I'm here to create the vision of someone else, unless, I'm the lead or whatever. So this experience of working together, keeping your ego in check and making sure that in the end the product is, developed and released is invaluable experience. And putting myself in the shoes of someone who's hiring, I would always like to see that. And ideally,
And you're also absolutely. And you're also bringing back like what you learn working within a company is incredibly important. Like how there's a hierarchy, like following a team, understanding like what your role is within that team, that you can't do everything, that delegation does exist. And if you can take that and then bring it back to the modding communities and have that kind of structure where like, guys, I know we're all working in a dispersed way and everyone has their own initiatives, but we're much stronger and faster if we coordinate and we work together towards a common goal. I can see how both of these things can come together and someone can kind of dip their toes in both ponds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's not game development is game development. I think there is not the 100% path. It will always depend on the project's needs, like what are you developing, who are you developing it with. But yeah, 100%. I personally, currently, I'm not working in like a large modding group, like super active anymore. So I cannot give any insights into that, how that would look like. But what was super important for me personally, for example, was after I joined Bohemia, was to actually focus more on the community, because like in audio, because Arma 3's audio was great in terms of, you know, how it was implemented, etc. But the documentation was pretty lacking, and there wasn't ever really like a place to ask questions. So I was like, hey, can I kind of get some hours during the week where I can serve as some sort of like audio community manager and just answer questions in Discord, you know, because it keeps the community alive. It shows that, hey, the developers actually care, because we do, you know. And it's a great joy for me personally now to do that, you know, like people ask questions in the Arma Discord in the audio section. I'm like, hey, I'm there, you know, I can answer it. I can relay the questions back to the devs, etc. So this kind of, once API is the wrong word, this kind of things, this interface, you know, between the interface between modders and developers is just as important. And I think in terms of game development, if the company can afford to do it, because of course, if I answer questions on Discord, I'm not doing anything else at that moment, but there are not so many questions, and I try to keep it, you know, reasonable, of course.
And for what it's worth, I always think that anyone in a position in a game studio should be putting themselves in the situation where they're talking to players, where they're understanding how the community works, because then that informs what you do. Like, we always talk about having the product manager, community manager, kind of talking with the community, reaching out to them. And maybe there are formal channels for doing that. But I got so much value when I was in a professional kind of studio environment to speak to players, to go on Reddit, like ask them questions, have one-to-one interviews with players about how they use certain features or functions or what their problems are. And then that fueled me to do my job better. So if anything, I love what you're saying, because I think everyone should do it. It shouldn't be just pushed to one kind of role.
Yeah, and I think this kind of loops back to what we talked about earlier, how passion just cannot be replaced. Like if I would be like, hey, I'm doing audio, it's my job. So if at the end of the day I have my 8 hours in, and you know the sound the game has sounds cool, that would work. But I would not, because I'm the same as you. Like, I'm looking at Reddit, at the Arma Reforger Reddit, for example, daily, and see what people are talking about. I check out what mods are being published, etc. Simply because I really want to. And I think it's super important to, as a studio, and of course also as a modding group or a game jam, whatever you want to achieve, I think it really pays off to look out for people who have the sort of drive, like to be like, hey, I really want to know what's going on. I'm really interested in this project. And again, this is not something that you can train. You know, like, it has to come intrinsically from the person that is doing that. And of course, if I would be working on another project that is not Arma, because I grew up with Arma, I might not even be so enthusiastic about it, you know. So it's also about the fit with the project, if you know what I mean, like, if
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, you do sound design, and I'm really interested to learn more about sound design, because I did speak to the Foley teacher. That episode's going to come out at some point. And one of the great things about worrying about Foley is just like creating these lifelike sounds, and the way he manipulates sound to kind of make it feel real. Great. It's incredible. But then there's a whole other side to it, which is not just the sound itself, but kind of the design of it, how it works. How would you explain sound design to someone that has no idea?
You would think that this is like the most basic question that every sound designer has like an immediate answer to. At least I don't. So let me think for a second. Well, I mean, of course, everything you do in a game, and to an extent also whenever you see something in movies, it creates a noise, right? And something that I like to compare is okay, let me restructure. Sometimes I feel that a lot of people think sound design is basically just like picking a sound that exists, you know, and putting it somewhere. And at the very, very basic level, imagine it like this. Let's say you write a cartoon, or you draw a cartoon, you know, like with everything. You could, of course, just pick some random pictures from the internet and slap them together, but in the end, it would just not be coherent. Like, it would be all sorts of art styles, you know, the colors would be different, would be way off. So at the very, very basic level, it is sound design is to make sure that in the end it creates a coherent sound picture that conveys the emotional impact of whatever you want to convey. This is at the very, very basic level, because it gets very technical very quickly. Because aside from just making sure through editing and whatnot that the sound kind of fits the overall scene, especially in game audio, there is this whole other world of implementation. Like not just doing a sound asset, but actually getting it into the game, manipulating it into the engine, and of course mixing all of this together. Like in most modern games that are somewhat shooting heavy, you can bet that a single shot sound, like what you perceive as a single shot sound, actually consists of upwards of 50 sounds that are mixed in real time based on the environment you're in, the distance to the shot that you have, etc. There's the question of how wide a sound is. Like if you imagine someone is talking, you likely want to have it very spatialized so you can really pinpoint where this is coming from. But if you have like an explosion, imagine the real world, all the sound would reflect off from the ground. So it wouldn't sound as if it's just coming from this one location if it's close to you, but all these reflection would make it sound very wide, like it's kind of engulfs you. And this is also another factor that gets in, or how sound behaves over distance. Like do the high frequencies get cut off due to the atmosphere? Is something blocking the way, etc.? All of this also plays a huge role in sound design. And I think the beauty of the title or job description sound designer is that even just in the little microcosm of game sound design, you can ask someone what they do, and then someone else, and both of them might give you a completely different answer. Because there might be sound designers that mostly do the sound assets and then kind of hand them over for implementation. There might be sound designers that basically just do implementation, which would then go more towards technical sound design, And then there are people who kind of do everything, like myself. Like I design the sounds, I implement the sounds. Before I go on for too long, I think this kind of
it's brilliant.
Encapsulates it a little bit.
So it's really like the way I'm picturing it is obviously sound in our reality are kind of waves that are traveling around, bouncing off things that get affected by kind of the environment, that are kind of layered with other. It's just you're taking that thinking and being like, okay, if I'm playing The Last of Us, how does like these footsteps or the sound of nature mesh together? And like you also have to kind of program it in a way where it's like a radius where you can hear it based on the player position, and there's obfuscation and there's all these things. But to me, it's such a my mind kind of explodes, because once you start considering all the different ways you can manipulate and hear sound and the layering and the mixing, it becomes an incredibly important thing. Because I've played games. I used to play games on just like my speakers on my computer or whatever. And then I remember one time I was like, I'm just gonna get a cool headset and I'm gonna wear it. And man, the game I was playing just completely changed, man. Like the level of immersion, because we're wired to kind of become immersed if the sound feels like it's real life. It gives so much more. So I don't know if I'm in the ballpark there, but is that
100%. I mean, good sound in the end should ideally contribute like tremendously to the immersion, because it is supposed to like soak you in. And I think also worth mentioning, because you said, it's about immersion and realism, etc. Sometimes it can be the complete opposite. For example, something people oftentimes don't really think about in competitive shooters, like for example, I think Overwatch was it. Many others probably do it as well. Even Battlefield to some extent. They oftentimes use mechanics based on some sort of like threat level or who's aiming at you. Like if somebody is currently aiming at you, their footsteps suddenly become louder. So it's also about conveying information to the player, and as you said, audio is such a complex topic and oftentimes overlooked, because, the thing that people see literally is the visuals. But like you can definitely, I guarantee you, every game that had some proper audio work done on it, there was a lot of thought put into it. It's not just about making stuff logical and realistic, but also about making it work for whatever the game is trying to achieve. For example, in the Battlefield series, I think since Battlefield 5, maybe even earlier, if someone is shooting at you, like, or your general direction, their shots are louder. And the shots of your friendlies are usually always a lot quieter. And I think even the shots of your friendlies don't produce supersonic bullet cracks or these flyby noises and stuff like this. It's a method of prioritizing and sounds in order to inform the player about what's going on. And as you said, like your head could explode because you can think a whole game through like this, and you should. It's a huge area of the game, and a lot of work is usually done on it.
I never thought about the rules, man. Like you just taught me something entirely new, which is, of course, if like I don't know, you mentioned Overwatch. If I'm locking onto someone and I'm like running at them and I'm pointing a gun, I want the player of which the person is pointing the gun to hear those footsteps so that they can react, and then it almost becomes UX. Like it's like the usability of that moment. I didn't know you do that stuff with sound. I just thought you're trying to make it as kind of not broad, but like just sound is a law. And it's like it's like in the real world, you can't manipulate it. So like you just hear footsteps if you hear them, but it sounds like you guys are creating rules on that sound, what type of sounds are being played, to then help the game feel better, to help the player make better reactions, better decisions, etc.
Even in the context of, like as I said, like Arma is a more of a simulation type of game in a sense, but even there, we sometimes don't go realistic. We sometimes just go more like, given how the game works, like what would make sense in terms of like audible ranges, or maybe we don't make it sound exactly what you might expect it to sound in order to make it a bit more informative about what's going on, because sound isn't just emotion. That is super important, but it's also information. And once you factor that in, like a whole other world opens. And I think it is also one of the areas, because as you said, like you didn't think about it so far, it is one of those areas that I think even like younger, not younger, but like more inexperienced sound designers don't think about immediately. Like for them, it's more like, oh, we put some sounds there, but now there's a lot more to it oftentimes.
So walk me through some of these interesting rules that you have when you're designing sound in a game. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but you came up with some really good examples of Battlefield and Overwatch. But in general, when you're looking to implement a sound in a game, what are you considering?
Well, I have to preface this a little bit, or put a little disclaimer there, because I mostly worked on more like military games in my audio career. So I'm very focused on that. I've never really worked on a commercial project that has like magic or even like some sort of super competitive shooter. So I cannot really speak from firsthand experience there. Very important for me to mention that. But in general, I wouldn't say that it makes sense to set some broader rules. I would always first check what game are we developing and what are we trying to achieve. And to some extent, not to some extent, and probably most importantly, speak to the designers, like the actual game designers, because audio having autonomy is great, but in the end, the game designers are the ones that have the vision of what they want to achieve. And maybe there is like some feature where if audio would just get a ticket like, hey, do audio for this, they would make something that sounds nice. But if we actually sync with the game designers, maybe we suddenly realize, hey, this is actually part of like a broader picture, like it's not just a sound for example, shooting, but it's a sound for identifying who's shooting at who. Like what are we actually trying to do here? So yeah, I hope it's not a disappointing answer, but I would say it really just super, super duper depends on the project and what the project is trying to achieve. Like competitive shooter, competitive shooter. Yeah, sure. Make sure that everything is very clear and readable. Maybe something again from the real world, from other games. I oftentimes hear when speaking to people that many people think that competitive shooters, weapon sounds oftentimes, and I'm speaking not about Battlefield, but really more those hero shooter type games, that weapon sounds are often like very lackluster and dry in some sense, compared to like Battlefield, where you shoot and you have like all that environmental response, arc raiders. But it's very deliberate because ideally you want the weapon sounds to be very distinguishable, kind of short, so they don't overlap with all the other sounds. Because all this is like audio real estate, you know. Like if you don't have a sound there, some other sound can shine. Which is oftentimes for these sort of hero shooters have more extenuated, like short, snappy, very distinguishable weapon sounds. Because there it's really more about I'm hearing something and it is this weapon and it's exactly over there. And oftentimes sort of like environmental response, which makes sounds very immersive and beautiful, are oftentimes very toned back because it sounds nice, but it's not very important for what the player needs to hear in these super fast competitive environments. As an example,
what you highlighted, which I'm realizing now, is the type of game, right? Like Overwatch, you're gonna have six. I don't know if it's six people on a team or five or whatever it is, but you have all.
Myself, by the way,
I know I've played a bunch of it, but I know they changed in Overwatch 2 and they went back and forth. But you have like six people or six teams or two teams of six people each, just fighting in an arena, shooting guns, throwing grenades, like all these sounds going off at the same time. And you mentioned all your real estate, so at that point, you have all these sounds flying in. Mm-hmm. How do you make it digestible? Because it can become overwhelming if you're hearing everything super loud. In a game more like Battlefield, where it's like more realistic, kind of military simulation of whatever, you're then trying to refine the experience for the individual based on, is he in a sniper shot and then in the other building there's a gunfight going, and will that distract them from that one-to-one situation with the sniper against. It just really depends on the game and the context, and then you establish the rules. Yeah,
100%. Like it's really all about what are we trying to achieve here, because imagine if like one of those high-speed competitive shooters had like super drawn-out weapon tails, so like the environment response, etc., would just become like one noise, you know, it would be like everywhere, and everything would suddenly become super unreadable because everything just kind of overlaps.
And do you guys do a lot of testing in terms of like the sounds and like how people find it, or is this something that you kind of intuitively? Yeah. So how would that work?
Oh yeah, we have. I can just speak for Bohemia now, of course, but we have like a play session. Well, we have daily play tests in general for the games itself, themselves. And oftentimes if there's something like really off, people will notice it. Like we'll get a report and like, hey, this, I don't know, reload sounds are broken, or like this weapon just sounds really wrong, or something has no sound at all. You know, sometimes there is no ticket for an asset. It just happens, you know, people will definitely find it. And then we do dedicated audio play tests, like at least every other week, kind of switching between projects, etc., where we can then, before the playtest, we were like, hey, what has been done? Like, what do we want to focus on right now? And then we kind of listen with more audio people, you know? So we have both kind of like the general experience, like how do players react in those regular playtests, and then more audio-focused playtests. But that's just us. I know that other companies handle it very differently, and in larger companies, you might have some dedicated, audio playtesters that more focus on audio, more focus on other stuff. Yeah.
No, the reason I ask is because I think intuitively people don't understand sound design in a way that you could critique it. Maybe some do, but I'd say like the average player is playing a game and they can visually critique or say the gameplay is like this. I want it this way. I want this type of quest design. I want this type of combat, whatever it is. But when it comes to sound design, it's just something I'm speaking personally for myself, and maybe I'm drawing a generalization, but I wouldn't know how to. I can tell you if a sound is great. Like I've played Last of Us and I thought that's a great sound design, or even Arc Raiders. Oh, yeah. I thought Arc Raiders has incredible sound, and I'm hoping to talk to Ben at some point over at Embark. But it's. Is it a subjective process where like the team like says this is what we want sound to sound like and this is what we feel is best, or are there general rules or kind of categories to create this sound? If you get what I mean, it's just it becomes like a matter of taste, of intuitively what sounds good for the player, what the players want. There's a bit of a mix. I don't know how to set it, because I can tell you with a lot of gameplay games, like people have different ways to build a game, different ways they want the players to play. But sound is like, I can't critique it. I don't understand it. Like, I just think it sounds good.
I would say it depends. I mean, the fun part is, as you said, sound a large part of sound also is subjective. And I would say there's some objective criticism in terms of sound, then there's subjective criticism. Objective criticism, for example, would be, I can't locate where sound is coming from. Like, hey, the sound design is in a way that there is so much stereo stuff that the spatialized stuff is kind of going under. So suddenly it's very hard to pinpoint like where stuff is happening. Subjective stuff then would be more like, hey, I don't like the mechanics on that weapon, or I don't like these footsteps, etc. I mean, of course, at some point it becomes so disturbing that it might become objective, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And funny enough, we just had like a little meeting about like how to do some certain weapon sounds, etc. And then one person says, "Oh, I really like that," and the other person says, I think that's the worst part, And in the end, that's the beauty of a hierarchy. In the end, at some point, the highest point in the hierarchy will just have to make a call and be like, "Hey, this is the direction we're going, and we want it to sound like this," and that's that. The same with stuff like audible ranges for stuff. In Arma, we try to make it somewhat realistic if it's possible. We're like, hey, would it be audible over this range in real life? And if not, then we can tweak it. For more abstract games like DayZ, for example, if there is a sound, then oftentimes it's more a matter, even though DayZ is also a bit more realistic, and also not the game I'm personally working on, by the way. But that would be an example where it leads more towards the direction of, okay, but what do we want the players to know? Like, okay, if there is some, I don't know, building or some crafting, maybe we want to over-extenuate the audible range a bit in order to inform other players around that there is a player doing something, to make it a bit more tense, because then oh, it's a sound that can be heard over a long range. So if I do this, I have to be on edge and really aware of my environment. Does that make sense? Like,
it does.
Is it clear what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the different ranges of sound overall in a game? Because I'm trying to understand, like, imagine footsteps. Is there a bar that we can, a technical ceiling that we can keep improving? Like, let's say I'm playing a game and I'm running through mud, and then I want to make muddy sounds. But like, can we keep making it more and more realistic to the point where, like, can the bar quality of sound keep going higher and higher in the future, or is there a sense that we're kind of faking some sounds because that's what we're accustomed to hearing? Like, the amount of times, just to preface, but the amount of times I've played World of Warcraft my whole life. I hear in movies the same bear sound, the same wolf sound. Like, there are just certain sounds that just, like, there's like a bear sound, like, roar. Apologies for.
I think I know exactly what you mean.
Do you get? But because I've fought like hundreds of thousands of bears in World of Warcraft, leveling my night elf, I know exactly that sound, or a chicken, or just. And I just kind of, as I look across, I see so many different games having the same sound effects. And I'm wondering, like, is there space for more realism, or are we just accustomed to sounds and we stick to it?
Well, both. The thing is, what you just expressed is actually multiple things. I mean, the first thing when you said like footstep sounds and can we get more realistic, quote unquote, well, or let me maybe start there. The question is, do you want to be realistic?
Yeah.
Like in a game like Arma, probably. In a game like The Last of Us, maybe. In a game that's like super cartoonish, probably not. So this whole thing of what is realistic and what's not is always, I try to avoid it, in terms of sound, because then you have to commit to saying this is realism, and it's oftentimes not really. The second part is hearing sound assets over and over, and that really is just a matter of most of the cases. Of course, maybe there is some intention in some cases, but usually it's just a matter of availability of recordings, because especially when developing a really large game, it is just impossible to record 100% and everything yourself, especially when it's stuff like bears. Because of course you could go to a zoo and hope that they vocalize a little bit, but then you would have maybe other people talking, etc., some wind and noise. So oftentimes sound designers will resort to sound libraries. And I would say it really depends on the game, of course, but I would say that, oh, that's some heavy rain. I would say it's like between 60 and 80% in most games probably is based on sound libraries. And the sounds are then, of course, processed, etc. But the core material that's been worked on is from sound libraries. And then what's being recorded is oftentimes stuff like Foley, so that the movement, like is more unique to that game, or maybe their own gunshot recordings, vehicles, basically the stuff that is a bit more special and upfront in the game. Which is why stuff like bear sounds that are just hard to record, and even, have fun finding a bear that is will to vocalize exactly the way you want in your region, depending on where you live. It's just hard to come by. And then the third thing is realism itself. So let's assume that we want to make like the most hyper realistic game ever and possible. I would say it's a Pareto thing where you try to get like 80% there, and the last 20% would just be so much that it's probably not worth putting the time in unless it's kind of some sort of like footstep simulator, because if you say footstep implementation, it always sounds very simple, but if you're talking about mud footsteps, etc., and wet footsteps, that already means that not just do you have to produce the audio assets, but the game code or scripting, whatever it comes from, has to inform you that there is a footstep, that a surface that is muddy. It has to inform you that it is wet, so it's also already going to the realm of, okay, we need to kind of handle these stuff and sync with code and get some sort of, signals or controllers to work with. And then what is realism? Like, a mud recording is a mud recording. The only thing is the mud here might sound a little bit different than the mud over there or in some other part of the world. So,
you killed that answer. Apologies because I asked you too many questions all at once, but you did amazing.
Dude, 100%. Really, I mean, if you didn't notice, I really like talking about sound. So please go on.
I love it. I love it. So, like, how closely are you working with these teams? Because you mentioned, like, if I'm a game designer or I'm a system designer or I'm scripting, like, it feels like any action that happens in the game, there has to be sound. So you're kind of like hooking in at every step and making sure that then kind of you're programming the levels, you're programming how maybe just how it blends in with other sounds. Like, there's so many rules. How do you keep track of something like that? Like, how does your workflow look like?
By having a manager that is very great at organizing. Now, really, like, huge shout out to Philip, who's the audio project lead on Reforger. Like, he is probably the best organizer I know. And it might sound cheesy, but I can really just kind of relax and ensure that he will take care of stuff if something is really missing in terms of like overall organization. So I'm very confident in that in the overall picture, what we're working on right now makes sense, which I'm extremely grateful for. So that question would probably better gear towards him. And then there's the other stuff where I have ownership over a certain area. And honestly, I just try to stay on top of things because pipelines are great and they usually work to the most extent, but nothing beats just regularly checking in with people and seeing how things work. I have a habit of basically just collecting Slack channels. I know most people try to be in as less or as little Slack channels as possible. I basically, as soon as I see like a new Slack channel popping up that might be even remotely relevant to me, I get in there and like once or twice a day, I just check the channels. And if I see something that might relate to audio, I just hop in or just quickly create a ticket for myself or make a reminder, like the best thing about Slack is remind me like in a week or so. I wish every messenger had this feature. That would be amazing. Anyway, so yeah, long story short, like great manager that kind of takes most of the load off my shoulders. Thank you, Philip. And then just trying to myself stay on top of things and, fill in the gaps basically and follow important features and follow up with people.
And underneath your manager, Philip, what are the different roles that exist within an audio team? Because I don't want to, like, is everyone just an audio designer or I know we talked about Foley, but just to recap, just so people understand, like, what is actually an audio team and how does it fit within a kind of a one manager system where he's kind of helping organize and coordinate everyone?
It depends. it really depends on the studio.
Yeah, of course.
I would say the Bohemia audio team is actually very, very small compared to the games that we develop. Like we have those huge open worlds with like tons of assets, but the audio team itself is actually fairly small. I mean, on Arma / Enfusion, because we use our own game engine, actually, the Enfusion engine, including our own audio solution. So we're not working with Unreal. Currently, we are actually only really 3 full-time sound designers on Arma, with one hopefully joining soon. We'll see. We currently have a position open. I'm just making sure I really don't forget anyone. Plus someone, Tomasz, who's taking care of the music as well. And then we have 3 programmers who are kind of linking between engine and, like the game part. So there's like our generic engine functionality of how audio is handled, basically, and how the audio editor is set up. And then there's some more game-specific functionality. So yeah, technically, in terms of proper dedicated audio work, it is 6 people at the moment, maybe 7 if we count our overall audio lead in, who's also now taking over some hands-on work again. But he's still mostly busy with then checking in other projects.
That makes sense. And do you visualize audio as like a tech stack? Like, the reason I say tech stack is it's like layers of different sounds, right? Because you mentioned music. There's the ambient sound, so like birds, trees, wind. Then there's character movement, like the footsteps. Character might be talking. Character might interact with objects in the background. Menu options when you open something. Like, there are just so many different layers of sounds. How do you visualize that to stay organized?
Could you try to rephrase the question, please? Because I wouldn't know how to answer it at the moment.
How do you visualize all the different sounds that go into a game in a way where you can break them down into different categories?
Yeah. I mean, of course, UI sounds is one thing, meaning everything that is kind of non-diegetic, like not in the game world, but more like in your head as the player, and then the diegetic sounds that are in the game world, like really happening. That is probably the biggest differentiation there usually is. And yeah, I think that's that. I'm not sure if you meant the question to go deeper and I'm just missing it.
No, it's just I'm curious about, like, there's so many different types of sounds, like, in a game. So it's like, do you guys see them as like levels, and then like you mix them? You get what I mean? Like there are, I know we might have talked about this earlier, but I'm just trying to like understand all the different categories that exist, because you have kind of, I know there's diegetic and non-diegetic, which is like within the game or outside, like a menu item. But then you also have like, you have music, and imagine like a game like Red Dead Redemption. Like, there's music in the background. There are birds and trees and wind. There's the actual movement of the character itself. There are people that are talking to the character. There are all these different sounds that are flying in, and I'm wondering if you guys look at it as like one broad thing with like different kind of categories, or if it's a combination of programming between different elements within an engine that are just. I'm so interested in sound. I just don't know if I'm communicating this in a way that's easy for you.
Yeah, we have to find some common ground there, because I honestly can't follow right now. So if you say levels, do you mean like in terms of like difficulty to design, or in terms of priority? Like, what sort of level?
I mean, like levels in a building. Like, you know how like they talk about the tech stack, and like within the tech stack you have like the different kind of like pieces of technology that you use to run this app or this game. Like, you have the engine, you have the front end, blah blah blah. I'm trying to, in my head, I see sound, like you have all these different sounds that sit on top of each other and then together create the full sound experience. Maybe I'm just explaining it poorly because I'm not a sound designer.
No, I think what you're trying to describe is also a bit more abstract, right? Like, it's more of a visualization thing, yeah. Like, personally, I can just speak for myself. If I try to visualize it, I would actually go the complete opposite direction and not view it as like some vertical thing, but more like a very broad horizontal thing.
Okay.
If this goes towards the direction of what you meant.
Yeah. Please explain.
I don't view it as like, oh, like, this is kind of required for this. It is really, for me personally, of course, just the way I,
of course,
authentically would now think about it, is like this huge broad area, and everything is kind of just as important in the end, and also in terms of implementation, everything kind of needs its own implementation usually. There's broad systems that work, then super weird example, for example, a few years ago when Arma Reforger wasn't out yet, we wanted to do vehicle fire sounds, which sounds super straightforward. I mean, it's a looped sound, it's a fire sound on a vehicle, cool. The thing is, back then we didn't have the possibility to actually play a looped sound and just stop it whenever we wanted it, you know? Those are the sort of issues that you run into. So something that might seem very benign in the beginning can turn out to be something that you really have to put a lot of time and effort in and really try to like make sense of design wise so that it fits as many other use cases as possible, which back then luckily wasn't really my responsibility. So it's just like, hey, we have to find a solution. And then again, Philip mostly decided together with the designers. Yeah, okay. I think that's my answer. Like, it's just a broad thing, and everything is, you know.
I'm overcomplicating it because again, I'm just I had my own kind of view of it in a very abstract way, but like I'm imagining that vehicle sound, like you're putting the vehicle sound in the game, you're then kind of putting in some rules on how it works. And then it starts interacting with other sounds, and then that can create problems, right? It's kind of like you're throwing in like a new variable in the equation, and then it changes a couple things, and then you got to go back and think, okay, how do I tweak this? How do I tweak that? And that's why I imagine it like a stack, because I'm like, how do you view all the different sounds that are happening in that moment? Do you just play test it? Do you see it in like on a whiteboard? Yeah, I find it so interesting because I have no idea.
Probably more than okay. I want to say more than any other area, but that's a bullshit sentence because I don't really have any in-depth knowledge about many other areas. So
it's okay. You can feel that way. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's an attack. I think it's just your passion about sound.
No. In that case, I would just rephrase. Anyway, what I want to say is, I think it is super important to actually play the game when doing sound, because it is so easy to just put something in, test it like in an isolated manner, or even like put your little test case together and it sounds amazing. And then you actually play the game, and for whatever reason, it might really just be more of a gut feeling, you know, like nothing that you really can quantify, and it just feels wrong, like in the context of the overall game, which is why I think play testing and actually listening to it is so incredibly important, like really, really, really important.
That's what I find so fascinating. It's like you feel it, like you just know it because it's an intuitive thing that we do where we listen to sounds and we feel immersed in something. But you have to. There's no, I don't know. It's just there aren't like written laws. Like it's just something that you feel if it fits within the scenario. It's like you have to have it's like kind of like Rick Rubin when he makes like an album for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like he just knows that this sound feels right. Like this feels right for the situation. It feels right for the type of game.
Yeah. But it's the same. I mean, in the end, I think it's not too different from visuals, actually, especially when you think about more stylized games, you know, not games that try to be like super photorealistic. It's also often a matter of like small changes that can make like a visual design really work. That can make a visual design like really work in the context of the game or not, or like a game world where maybe some changes might make a game world look like a generic game world versus like a believable environment, you know? And I think it's the same with sound, and it's oftentimes also very subjective. A lot of people luckily thought that, you know, Arma Reforger was quite a step up in terms of audio for the Arma franchise, largely also thanks to the way more the way better audio capabilities of the engine. But there's still a lot of people that say like, hey, you know, Arma Reforger sounds horrible. You know, like I hate those fucking sounds. Like I cannot bear it. And, you know, while there are people who say, hey, like this is great, it's the best sounding shooter ever. And you always have those two opinions. I think it's just important to stay on top of all of them and kind of gauge like, hey, is it some spikes here and there, or is it like the actual sentiment? Like if suddenly like the Reddit would be filled with what the hell is the sound, you know, then I would know, oh, that needs some tweaking probably, if that makes sense.
No, it does, man. Yeah. I wanna push then more to you and your taste and kind of really what your influences are for sound. Like what I think a lot of people who work in a creative space have like a movie, have like a game or like a series of games that inspired them, or kind of tell them this is what makes great sound design. What are your influences?
Yeah, two things. First one being actually Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3 probably was the first game that really made me go, with sound, where previously I thought games sounded good, but Battlefield 3 really was the first game where I realized, wow, this feels amazing because of the sound, which is why it was such an honor recently to interview Ben Sapaio myself, who back then already worked on the Battlefield series, but I think it was actually their lead who got this going. Anyway, so yeah, Battlefield 3. I think Battlefield 3 still until today has the most satisfying weapon sounds to me personally. I just love it, but I might be biased. And the second inspiration simply is reality. Like, I cannot express in words how much sound itself fascinates me. And whenever I get to work on something new, like a new area, like I started working on some more like plane related stuff a while ago, and I did a really, 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 really deep dive into like the acoustics of airplanes, etc., and turbulence, and how much turbulence affects like what we hear, and how much ground reflections all around us influence our everyday life, basically in terms of hearing. And I just love learning about this and then trying to recreate it, because of course I'm working on like a simulation heavy game, so I try to make it as, let's say, authentic as possible, without wasting resources or making the actual sound project too complex. So figuring out how to translate reality into something that is believable and that still works in the game, where you're like, oh yeah, that's very close, like, oh yeah, I can recognize it and make sense. That's the greatest thing to me, like, really. And I need nothing more than reality. Like, everywhere I go, I usually find something where I can just hold on for a second and be like, oh man, that's cool. That sounds amazing. Even if it's just the way, a very certain way a room reflects the sound, Or if you ever have, yeah, okay, don't want to get too long. So that's that. Battlefield 3 and reality.
do you record the sounds? Like when you're like in an airplane, you're like, oh, this is interesting sound of the turbulence, or like, do you just, is your brain different in the way that you just like remember sounds really well, or
I remember it. I remember it. And I honestly don't run around with a recorder too much. Like, I do record sounds when there is something to record, but I'm not one of the guys who always have their recorder at hand. Like, honestly, at one point I wanted to be, but I just realized that I kept forgetting it, and I realized, nah, it's probably not happening. But it's also, I think the beauty of it is, or I should say, the process is usually, if I hear something in real life and I'm not sure why it sounds this way, or I listen to two recordings of the same thing but in different environments, and I hear there's a delta, like, oh, it's the same thing but it sounds different there, and it's definitely not just because it's a different microphone. I immediately ask myself, why? Like, why does it sound so different, or why does it even sound the way it does, or why does the sound change the way it changes when the object moved through the room or through the air, And then I sit down and do some research, and like actually read some research papers, especially now when doing plane research, some actual what do you call it, aerodynamic acoustic research, research papers, etc. And the beauty is, then suddenly it's not just a feeling or, oh, I know what it sounds like. It is actually, I know how it's supposed to sound like and why it sounds like this. And you can suddenly translate this knowledge to pretty much everything. Like, I was able to actually improve quite a bit on old sounds just by applying this new knowledge, because previously I was guessing why something sounded this way, and just try to recreate the sound, and it somewhat worked. And then suddenly understanding, oh, this is why it sounds this way. I was able to like make the actual project way more compact with a way better end result, So these deltas between my understanding and reality is what still keeps me going every day, basically.
Man, it's so interesting, because it's like how sound bounces off like a room, or like how it sounds in a forest, or how I just find it so, again, it's something that I wish I could speak or ask questions at a higher level, in the sense that for me it's just something so ephemeral. I've always just kind of like, yeah, it sounds really good. I'm in I'm playing The Last of Us and I'm in a basement. Everything sounds right. I don't really consider how the sound moves and bounces off the like. You're
but that's the
operating in
beauty.
magic for me. Yeah.
If it works, your brain goes, that's good, that fits, that makes sense. And then, the sound designers did a great job. Ideally, there is this catchphrase, or no, that's not catchphrase, just like this phrase in sound design, which I think holds true. And a good sound design is sound design that you don't really notice. I mean, sure, there's, of course, not in the sense that you hear something you're like, oh, that's amazing, that's always good, but ideally, you should just move through the word and it should just feel natural. And this can apply to both a realistic game and, some more stylized game. In the end, it should just feel right. Like what your brain perceives should all make sense, be it visual, audio, like everything together should flow. And if something of this doesn't work, then you immediately realize it. Like if you have like a super realistic 3D model, but the animations are shit, like they move like some wooden doll puppet, your brain also goes,
Yeah, there's
that's like it gets into that uncanny valley. It suddenly feels off, and I think it's the same with audio in the end. Like as long as your brain goes, yeah, I see nothing wrong here, and awesome.
What do you think is the? Actually, no. Before I get to that question, players have access to sound settings. They can go into their interface and they can toggle. They can change the levels. How do you look at the default kind of settings for sound? And then are you worried that sometimes players will change those settings and hurt their sound experience? Because you're trying to create a sound experience that sounds natural, out of box, sounds great, but then people can go in and they can lower sounds, they can increase them. How does that make you feel as an artist, as someone who's trying to curate this experience, but you're also allowing players to change things?
I would say all power to them. I mean, sure, we do a default mix and everything is tailored towards this, but everything that happens afterwards, I think is, it's if a player really wants to change the mix and they have the ability to do so, go ahead, do it. As the only thing is, please then just don't go to Reddit and be like, hey, everything is too quiet or whatever, and then hey, maybe please check your settings first. What I personally really appreciate and what we also did are like those dynamic range sliders that many games have, where you can kind of adjust the dynamic range of the mix. So
what is dynamic range?
Right, I should maybe answer that. It's basically very very simply put the average difference between quieter parts of the overall mix and louder parts. So let's say a very high dynamic range would, for example, be if, for example, a footstep would be like super quiet because in the overall scope of the picture, it is a quiet sound, and a shot is super loud. And then if you narrow the dynamic range or decrease the dynamic range, they move more together. And oftentimes a narrower dynamic range is used for, or it's also called night mode, where maybe you play on speakers, but you can't turn up the speakers so much. So many games offer a night mode where the dynamic range is decreased so that you can hear everything because everything moves closer together without increasing the volume so much. Because otherwise, if the dynamic range would be very high, you would probably just hear, like the shots, but not the footsteps anymore. But if the footsteps are brought up, or inversely, the shots are brought down, suddenly at the same level, you can hear both.
I see.
Which is a complete science in and of itself, because of course this also then has to work, and you basically have to work with mixing a game in two different ways, and it still has to kind of make sense and sound good, So lots and lots of
so much
rabbit holes you could fall into. Yeah,
it's really cool. It's really cool. What do you think is the future of sound design? I know this is a question I think a lot of independent crafts or individual crafts within games are asking themselves, because obviously we can always continue to increase the bar of what sound is and how it gets done and etc. But then you also have kind of this whole AI side to things. And I think a lot of people are asking themselves, like, if I'm to get into sound, like maybe I'm coming out of high school right now or school, and I really want to do sound design in games, but I just don't know where the industry's heading. What do you see for how things are going to change or how things can get better?
Let me think for a second.
It's a tough question. I totally take your time.
I mean, maybe to address the elephant in the room first, in terms of AI, I know there are models that are able to create sounds based on a prompt. They don't sound great at the moment, but they might sound great in the future. I mean, I don't want to get too quote unquote AI political here. I try not to engage with those conversations too much, because in the end, I'm not 100% anti-AI. I just personally don't like to use it, especially if it's, or mostly exclusively if it's generative AI. I just don't see any creative value in it. If other people want to do it, okay, go ahead, So right now, I would say, in terms of actual audio creation, we're not there yet. We might be there in a year, given how fast things are accelerating at some point. And if that's the case, go ahead. I think, given that implementation is still such a huge thing, and also taste, like how making it like really congruent in terms of how it sounds, I don't think that AI in and of itself, or generative AI, will take over the game audio world in that sense very soonish. But I might, of course, be completely wrong, because honestly, I try to stay on top of things, but now recently a colleague told me, like, hey, I wrote the script with Claude and it's super elaborate and it's crazy. It's a crazy complex code for Reaper. And I'm like, oh shit, that I didn't think I could just write this, basically. So yeah, so in terms of AI, we're not there yet. We might be there in a bit where AI can actually generate sounds that are good enough to be used in a game. And I would be more worried about AI then being able to also properly implement it. And honestly, I haven't seen anything in that regard so far, but I hope I don't plant any ideas right now.
No, but that's what I'm interested in, because it's like, I think we immediately think, oh, it's going to take over all all the different types of process and steps that I take to create these experiences in sound. And I am quite bearish on that, because just having a conversation with you for over an hour, you understand like how much kind of experience and intuition, especially for something that is human, like biologically, we listen to sounds, we're wired to hear them for survival. Like the idea that AI can just come in and just program a game perfectly from a sound design perspective in a way that it can get it done in one shot. No, it can get even in 5 shots. No, but like, not, I just think it's maybe that bear sound. I won't hear the same bear sound from the World of Warcraft in everything that I watch, right? And then you think, okay, maybe that's okay, but there's still that curation process. There's still that idea of working with taste, but I hope that it can empower people to create great experiences or better experiences. Not to say that they aren't amazing as if, but maybe there's a degree to sound that we don't know yet. I don't know. It just, with every technology, you ask questions.
I don't know either. Like, as I said, I try to avoid using generative AI just for personal reasons. And again, I'm not saying everybody has to. So I just couldn't answer like where it's headed.
Yeah.
In that term. And in terms of sound in general, like how I hope sound can develop. I actually made a whole video on my YouTube channel about how we still fake so much in sound in terms of acoustics, etc. Which at one end I think is great, because it means that games sound usually very different, because every game kind of has their own smoke, like creates their own smoke and mirrors in order to kind of simulate stuff and make things work. But just from a technological standpoint, I would be really interested to see some larger steps in the development of, let's say, real-time acoustic simulation, which is basically not really existing at the moment, because it would be so computation heavy. Meaning, usually, for example, the very easiest thing I'm talking about, and I mean it way broader, but the easiest thing you can think of is a sound source in a room. In real life, it bounces all around, etc. It just happens because that's how sound work. In the game, if you place it there, nothing happens. It just plays the sound. Then there are modules and plugins that, or what you then could do on the easiest side is to detect, hey, I'm inside a room. So now I also play some pre-baked reverb layer on top of that sound, which is still very common for weapons. And other sounds oftentimes can get some real-time reverb. But that real-time reverb then is a generic reverb that just gets modulated by some parameters of, for example, the size of the room, etc., and not really, the sound bouncing around. There have been some attempts on that, but they are usually also just very crude, don't sound so great and not really realistic. And those that went a bit further are incredibly computational, computation heavy. And then we're not even talking about stuff like sound being changed and influenced by gusts of wind or temperature, etc.
Oh wow, yeah.
Like we are so far away from that, and it would basically, like in my head, from like a layman technical perspective, this is basically the same avenue as like ray and path tracing, where you would really need some intense, dedicated computational power in order to even get close to trying to attempt the sort of stuff, especially when there's like hundreds of sound sources playing all the time.
That's
so
cool.
Yeah, that would be cool for me personally, just seeing where we could go with that and what it would sound like.
Yeah, it's incredible. You're saying the computations, like you need a machine to be able to understand how these waves of sounds interact in an environment, let's say a closed room, and then you add a fan or you add like a gust, and then there are particles going into this wave that then change
exactly.
it. And how do you simulate that? That's amazing.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Like I find that so cool.
Exactly. And there's nothing like that. I mean, maybe in some, research laboratory where there's like some offline computation done for acoustic modeling. But we definitely don't have anything really close to that in like some usable capacity that actually also sounds well in game audio, like far, far off.
From a player perspective, what are the best ways for me to listen to sound when playing a game? Like headphones, what type of headphones? Like I'm honestly asking this for myself because I always thought, right? Like how do you get the best thing, or even not even the best thing, but the right type of headphone without spending, I don't know, loads of money?
I feel no matter what answer I get, I'm going to get murdered by one side of the story or the
I didn't
other.
know it was a debate.
Well, I'm going to start with the probably most controversial take. I just wouldn't use any of these 3D emulation headphones or surround emulation headphones because they don't really have, surround means you have speakers all around you, which you obviously can't have when you have headphones because there's only 2 drivers in there. There are headphones with like multiple drivers, but this means also that the drivers have to be smaller, so they usually sound like shit. I was able to only try one of them, and they're also super expensive. That's not what most people have. Most people just have like a 2-driver headphone, a pair of headphones, like one speaker here, one speaker here. And what happens is there is like usually some bespoke filtering done in post, like after the game, in order to kind of separate frequencies a little bit more, etc. And I personally just think it sounds like shit. And most people think that they hear better with it on just because they want to, like, oh, I have this on. Yeah, it's placebo. It's like, oh, it's on. It sounds different. It sounds better. I can locate stuff better now. And I honestly think it is not true. And it just completely destroys the overall mix and design of the game's sound. It is literally just like some marketing gag in order to sell more expensive headphones and some filter software. So that's take one. Don't use this 3D or surround emulation. Second take, use whatever headphones you're comfortable with and that sound great to you, because the beauty of all these different headphone models is that they all have different like frequency characteristics, etc. And it's a matter of taste. Of course, if you say, hey, I really want to experience my games basically the way they were designed, like the way the audio engineers heard them. Aside from, of course, building like a huge mixing stage and a bespoke studio, if we just talk about headphones, then get a pair of studio headphones. And there are also, of course, differences, but they usually try to be more linear, like the frequency response is more linear than those hi-fi headphones, which oftentimes accentuate the lower frequencies and the higher frequencies in order to make it sound fatter and more present. Then use studio headphones. But otherwise, use whatever the hell, you think sounds good to you, because you don't have to mix the game.
Love it.
You just have to enjoy it.
You just have to enjoy, man. You just need something that's comfortable to you.
Exactly.
Okay. Then I think the last question I want to ask, Leon, is, and we touched on this at the start, but I think it's always good to end with some advice some words about what you would do if you were starting out as a sound designer today. We talked about modding. We talked about exposing yourself to projects with people, hackathons, create your own game, but also try to get that professional game experience within a company. Is there anything else you'd like to add on top, or kind of any thoughts you have about someone starting off today?
I mean, again, huge disclaimer is I also just kind of slid into the industry, you know, and was also more brought in by a friend than like really pushing for it myself in that regard when it comes to Bohemia. So I don't want to speak with large authority here. So I'm just speaking from what I can observe. I just really can reiterate. I think the most important part is to actually get stuff done, to actually get project experience, and to have stuff that you can showcase other than some reels, you know? Because from what I've heard, oftentimes reels are not even like listened fully because there are so many like applicants that if your resume shows that even if you're like a junior, you apply for a junior position, it just immediately looks so much better if you have some actual projects there, because it shows that you likely work in a team, that you have actual experience with implementing stuff outside of this very focused, today I want to learn Unreal Engine and implement a sound. That is nice. You know, LinkedIn is completely flooded with videos of sound designers. Hello guys, today I show you how I implemented footstep sounds. And it's basically always the same process, you know, and it's great. It's great that this person learned how to implement footstep sounds, but this is the 10,000th footstep sounds. Rather show how you created like an audio vision and, you know, worked on a project together with people and what came out of it. And yeah, honestly, try to find or work towards something that you're really passionate about, because I think in this environment you have a lot of people have a lot of competition of very passionate people, and if you just go for it in order to maybe make a living, that will be very hard. So speaking just from my own personal experience, it's always easier to work towards something where you're like, oh, I really want to do that, versus it like I have to do it because I need to earn a living, which of course is easier said than done now as from somebody who, you know, is able to make a living and is in this very privileged position. Yes, I think that summarizes it.
It does. And those are wise words. Everyone gets in a scrappy way. But the important thing is that you have a passion. If you believe in something, even if you have to do something else to make that money, you can still keep working on things that matter to you.
Yeah, exactly. That I just wanted to add, like, be smart about it, you know, because of course, looking at the current state, I also ask myself, like, oftentimes, like, if something would happen, what would I do, you know? And definitely, I wouldn't expect to immediately find a new job, and I would probably work some odd jobs or whatever. I think also just for your own mental health, it is just always better to have some sort of routine, work part-time something else, and, you know, still leave room for audio if you want to get into it. But Jesus Christ, don't get into a position, please, where everything banks on that within the next 1 or 2 months you find a new job, and otherwise your savings run out, like in audio, you know. And I think that's looking at the current state of the industry, from everything I see, that is probably a very, very risky gamble at the moment.
Yeah, we need to be smart. Can you flag or just can you highlight your YouTube channel? Because that's one of the big reasons I want to talk to you, is that you do kind of have your own
Sure.
channel where you talk to people, and just for the audience in case they want to follow you.
Yeah, it's called LAxemann, which is kind of my internet pseudonym handle, whatever. I actually started out again to speak about sound design in a way that's interesting also for non-sound designers, like just people who are interested in sound. I have to admit, though, that recently I mostly focused on showcasing the scripts that I developed for Reaper, which is the digital audio workstation that I use. But, you know, there is some stuff for non-sound designers, so I called it Listen In. And I recently also had the great pleasure and honor to interview Ben Sapaio, one of the audio directors at Embark Studios, so who did our graders and who previously worked on the Battlefield franchise, for example, which I think is he gave incredible insights. I think it's a pleasure to listen to him. So if you're interested in that, please have a look-see. And yeah.
Amazing. We'll put the link below in the description for the channel and that interview with Ben's. And Leon, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I really am a complete amateur when it comes to understanding sound design, and I feel like I left understanding a lot more, despite asking quite a few abstract, difficult questions.
It's been a pleasure, my dude, and those 1.5 hours really flew by. Crazy. And also great questions, by the way. It was such an easygoing talk. Like I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it, dude. We'll speak soon.